Hey, everybody. Welcome back to our continuing series of Moses in Exodus. We are at a very interesting point in the story of Moses in Exodus. Unfortunately, it's an interesting point because it is a low point, probably the lowest of all the lows that Moses experienced in his time leading, delivering, and helping the Israelites move from Egypt and slavery to the promised land that God had promised to give his people. Moses had a lot of highs along the way, and he had a lot of lows along the way as they traveled that journey together. And I think that in these verses or in these chapters, that we are now in the middle of studying, that we find both the highest of the high and the lowest of the low, one right after the other. So we had just finished Moses receiving the Ten Commandments from the Lord on the top of Mount Sinai, which was the highest of the highs of all the time that he spent leading the people out of Egypt through the wilderness, being able to spend those 40 days on the pinnacle of Mount Sinai, communing with God, interacting with God, hearing from the Lord, hearing the Lord speak to him directly, watching the hand of the Lord write the Ten Commandments on those two stone tablets. What an amazing high mountaintop experience that was, not only literally but figuratively. And yet now we're in the part, this is actually the golden calf part 3 of our study. We now are in the middle of seeing, just right after that high mountaintop experience that Moses had, now he's in a valley experience. He's come to the base of Mount Sinai, to where the people are. And although that's not a physical, geographical valley, certainly spiritually, emotionally, mentally, in all those other ways for Moses, it was definitely a valley experience for him. Again, I think kind of showing how sometimes that happens in life for us too. We have this wonderful mountaintop experience with the Lord, and before you know it, Satan gets into our life somehow and brings something that will bring us down very soon after we have that closeness with God in an amazing and special way. Next thing you know, we turn around and we're facing a very big problem or difficulty or disappointment. And it's just the way Satan tries to bring us down from that mountaintop communion with God. And so that's where we see Moses as we start our study today in chapter 32 of Exodus. This is the third session we've been together to talk about the golden calf experience for Moses. And this is where we really see Moses take matters into his own hands because of what the people were doing. And I think Moses was righteously upset. He had a righteous anger. He had a reason to be angry with the people. But I think it was probably even more pronounced because he had just come off this high mountaintop experience with the Lord. So, in other words, what the people were doing would have made him angry no matter what. But I think the fact that he had just come just hours before from the pinnacle of Mount Sinai, and now and this time with the Lord, and now he sees what the people are doing, and that just infuriates him that much more because of how wonderful and fulfilling it was to be with the Lord, and how awfully disappointed he was when he saw what the people were doing. So let's look in the Bible in chapter 32 of Exodus. I'm actually going to back up just a little bit. We're going to really start in verse 19 today, but I wanted to back up just a little bit because there are a couple of points I want to make from verse 15 and 16 in chapter 32 before we move on in our story, because there are a couple of important things I think that we should look at when it comes to the actual physical Ten Commandments, those physical two stone tablets, and look at a kind of a deeper meaning behind them. So if you want to look at verse 15 of chapter 32, if you open your Bibles there, it says, "Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the two tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets which were written on both sides, and they were written on one side and the other. The tablets were God's work, and the writing was God's writing engraved on the tablets." So the very finger of God has written these 10 commandments on the stone tablets. So one of the things I wanted to ask you today is, first question would be, why were there two stone tablets? Why two stone tablets? I mean, it says that they were written on both sides. So why did God need two stone tablets? Well, some people think that, as a matter of fact, you see this often in artwork that has to do with the 10 Commandments, in movies and TV shows where they're kind of reenacting Moses and the 10 Commandments. They often show it as, well, one stone tablet had 5 commandments on it, and the other stone tablet had 5 commandments on it. So you have 10 commandments and 2 stone tablets, and so 5 and 5. That's why there were 2 stone tablets. But that's not really what's going on here. As a matter of fact, what's really going on here is that both stone tablets had the exact same thing written on them. Both stone tablets had all 10 commandments written on them. So they were basically exact duplicates of one another. They were exactly the same. It's just like if you were to send an email out to someone and you wanted to copy someone else. You CC them, right? So you have one email, but you want to send it to 2 different people. And you hit send button, and one email goes to the first party, and the second email, the second email goes to the second party, but they're the exact same message. They have the same information written on them. And that's what's happening here. God has inscribed 2 stone tablets that are exactly the same. So, so why would he do that? Well, let's hold that just for a second. The other thing I want to talk about is how were the commandments laid out on the stone how were the commandments laid out on the stone tablets? So it says here, the stone tablets which were written on both sides, they were written on one side and the other. So again, in modern art and so forth, you often see, or even classic art, you see the stone tablets written on one side. But that's not the way it was. The stone tablets were written on both the front and the back. So that just begs the question of, well, which commandments were on the front and which commandments were on the back? We don't know. We don't know. But, could it have been that there were 5 tablets on the front? 5 commandments on the front of the tablets and 5 commandments on the back of the tablets. We have 10 commandments. You have a front and a back, 2 sides. 5 and 5 breakouts seems to make sense. It's possible. But I prefer to think that they were divided in a different way. I think they were divided with the first 4 commandments on the front and the last 6 commandments on the back. So why do I think that? Well, the first 4 commandments have to do with man's relationship to God. Man's relationship to God. You shall not have no other gods before me. You shall not worship any idols. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. So the first 4 commandments have to do with God's relationship to man in an obedient way. The last 6 commandments really have to do with man's relationship to man, our relationship with one another in a God-ordained way. So I think it makes sense to think that the first 4 commandments are written on the front of the tablets, man's relationship to God, and the last 6 commandments are written on the back, man's relationship to man. And this is the way that God wanted us to interact with him in an obedient way, and how God wants us to interact with one another in an obedient way, in a God ordained way. So that's what I think was happening there. As far as why there were two copies, well, this these Ten Commandments, these words of God, as it were, this is a covenant. God calls it this is a covenant. God calls it a covenant between God and man. It's another way to think. Covenant is kind of old-fashioned usage. Another way to look to describe it in a more modern way is that this is a contract. This is a contract between two parties, God and man, and it's a legal transaction actually. And so back in the day, and even today, really, when you enter into a legal transaction between you and another party, you want to write down a contract between you and them so that if there is any dispute or any conflict that arises out of that agreement that you have with one another, that understanding that you have with one another, then you have a copy of what was agreed to at the beginning. What did you agree to do in the contract when this was first decided? And so let's say, for example, I'm going to sell you a piece of property. We're going to put into a contract what the price is, what the size of the property is, where it's located, when you can take possession of it, when I have to be out of it, who gets to inspect it, and so on and so forth. And when we write that all down in a contract, you get a copy of it, I get a copy of it, and then if there's any dispute about any of that or any conflict of any kind, then we have the ability to take this to a higher authority and to have some resolution worked out based on the agreement that we have reached, that has been written, and that we both have received a copy of to keep for ourselves. So the writing of the Ten Commandments on the stone tablets is basically a contract between God and man. And it spells out what God has promised to do. It has spelled out what the people have promised to do. And it puts it all down in a formal document where it's clear what was agreed to at the very beginning. Now, the difference is between the contract between you and me and the contract between God and man is that God doesn't need a copy. God does not need a copy of the contract. He knows what the agreement was. He'll remember what the agreement was, and he'll be faithful to what the agreement was. He's not going to break the contract, so he doesn't need a copy of the contract. He wrote it, and he's good for it, as they say. We can trust him. So he wrote two copies of the Ten Commandments and gave man both copies. We got to keep both copies of this contract between God and man. So Moses came down the mountain with two exact duplicates of the same contract between God and man. Moses got his copy and he got God's copy. But there's something else about this contract that I think is interesting and important to note. I don't think this was a contract. I think this was a special, put it this way. I think this was a special kind of contract between God and man. Some people have said it's a treaty. It's like a peace treaty that you sit down with someone that you've been at odds with and you decide to be at peace and to cooperate. And so you put down in this contract, what the peace treaty is, and you get this and we get that, and this is. I don't think that it's a peace treaty. I don't think it's a treaty. I don't think it's a contract of a treaty. What I think it is I think it is a formal agreement between two persons in a marriage, in the context of a marriage. I think this is a marriage contract. And I think it makes sense even that this is carried forward into the New Testament as well. Because we are told in the New Testament that we as the church, as believers, are the bride of Christ. So that is a context of a marriage. Jesus is the groom, we are the bride as believers. And so I think that we can take that as a New Testament example of what was happening here in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, in the New Covenant, the marriage contract is between Jesus and believers. In the Old Testament, the marriage contract was between God and his people in in the Old Testament. So so in this marriage contract, in the traditional marriage contract, and this is something that was commonly done in ancient times. When a man and a woman married, there was a contract, a marriage covenant that was written down and agreed to by both parties. And basically, what this marriage contract, this marriage covenant did, is it outlined the rights and the responsibilities of both parties. Uh, the husband and his family agreed to this. The bride and her family agreed to this, and so the marriage would be consummated with both understanding that we bring this to the marriage and they bring that to the marriage, and the marriage will move forward based on these understandings of the way that the marriage will be. And that contract would have been witnessed by someone who is there and sees that both parties have agreed to it and they've signed it, and this witness signs it to say, yes, this is what the contract is. So think about the Ten Commandments. God has written them down, and he and the Israelites have agreed in this covenant that God will do things. He will take them to the promised land, and he'll be with them, and he'll walk with them, and he'll protect them, and he'll help them. And the people have agreed that they will obey him. And this is the writing out of that contract and of that understanding. And God is one party, the people are the other party, and Moses is the witness. Moses is the witness. He was there on the mountaintop when God wrote out the contract. He knows what the people had said before this. In chapter 24, let's look at that real quick. In chapter 24 of Exodus, the people, in verse 7 of chapter 24, it says, "Then he took the book of the covenant and read it as the people listened, and they said, 'All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient.'" So Moses knows what the people have promised. He knows what God has promised. He sees God write out this covenant and this contract, and he is the witness that it was done in that way. And usually marriage contracts back in that day, they were legal agreements, and one of the things that they specified was inheritance rights and property considerations. So, if the man owned property and he was entering into a marriage with this bride, then he wanted to be known who would inherit this land if he were to die or something like that. And so you have the legal rights of both spouses written out in this marriage contract, and especially when it comes to inheritance and to property ownership. And so we have this in the Ten Commandments. God has agreed in this covenant with his people that if they're obedient and they honor him and they worship him and they obey the Ten Commandments, that the inheritance and the property they will own eventually is the promised land, and that he will walk with them there and protect them to get there and be with them until they get there. Also, the marriage contracts in that day also did things such as they outlined specifically what the dowry was going to be as part of the marriage. And in this case, the dowry is that God will be with his people. The marriage contract in that day spoke of the obligations of each party. And in this covenant, a marriage contract between God and his people, the people have promised obedience. That's their obligation, and God has promised them the promised land. Also, in the contract between two people when they were to be married were the provisions for divorce. What would prompt a divorce to be able to be had in a legal way? If one party or the other was adulterous, for example, obviously that would be grounds for divorce. So in this case, the provision for divorce between God and his people would be disobedience. If the people are disobedient, then God could divorce himself from them. And this especially has to do with idolatry and seeking after other gods, which is exactly what happened with the golden calf situation. So another reason that I think that we're talking about another reason I think we're talking about a marriage contract here or a marriage covenant is because we find this language used elsewhere in the Old Testament to describe what's going on here between God and his people at the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai with the golden calf and so forth. So if you want to look in your Bible or turn in your Bible to Ezekiel, I think we see here God using language of a wedding contract, of a marriage covenant, to describe what's happening here at the base of Mount, or at the top of Mount Sinai, the base of Mount Sinai, in terms of the agreement between him and his people. So turn over, if you would, to chapter 16 of Ezekiel, and we're going to start with verse 8. It says, "Then I passed by you and saw you, and behold, you were at the time of for love. So I spread my garment over you and covered your nakedness. Also swore an oath to you and entered into a covenant, a contract with you." And I think this was a marriage contract, a marriage covenant, "so that you became mine." Again, the language of a wedding, of a marriage, declares the Lord God. Verse 9, "Then I bathed you with water, washed off your blood from you, and anointed you with oil. I also clothed you with colorfully woven cloth and put sandals of fine leather on your feet, and I wrapped you with fine linen and covered you with silk." Fine linen and silk, what's that sound like? Doesn't that sound like a wedding dress? God dressed his people in a wedding dress, as it were, figuratively. Verse 11, "I adorned you with jewelry, put bracelets on your wrists and a necklace around your neck. I also put a ring in your nose, earrings in your ears, and a beautiful crown on your head. So you were adorned with gold and silver, and your dress was of fine linen, silk, and colorfully woven cloth." Again, the language of the description of a wedding dress. God clothes his people as a bride in a beautiful wedding dress at this time. He says, "You ate fine flour, honey, and oil, so you were exceedingly beautiful and advanced to royalty. Then your fame spread among the nations on account of your beauty, for it was perfect because of my splendor, which I bestowed on you, declares the Lord your God." And so here, the splendor which I bestowed on you, the bride takes the name of her husband. The Jewish people took the name of God himself. So here we have this wonderful example of a marriage, of an agreement between a groom and his bride, between God and his people. And so this is why I think this covenant, this contract between God and his people, was actually a marriage contract between them. Another thing I want to mention is that modern archaeology has found marriage contracts and other contracts, as it were, covenant agreements in the archaeological digs that they're doing that are written on pieces of limestone, uh, limestone pieces of limestone. It's called ostraca, Ostrica, ostraca. And basically, ostraca was used in ancient times as an inexpensive writing surface. So if you had a contract to write out, you could write it on some type of a parchment or something, but that was expensive. That material was expensive to use to write on. But a piece of limestone, you could write on that, and it was inexpensive. So we do have examples in the Old Testament, I mean, in ancient archaeology of this time frame where contracts and even marriage contracts were written on stone. They were written on stone. So yet another reason to think of the Ten Commandments, the reason God wrote them on stone is because this is the way many of the marriage contracts, most of the marriage contracts were done back in that day. Those contracts were written on stone. Unfortunately, what we're going to find out is that it doesn't take long. It takes basically 40 days for the people to violate the agreement that they had made in this marriage contract to be the bride of God. Because in 40 days, they have turned to a golden calf and they have not been obedient to the Lord in terms of especially idolatry and going after other gods, which totally violated one of the important pieces of this agreement between God and his people, that they would obey him. Because number one is have no other gods before me, and number two is worship no idols. And here they've broken those first two commandments right off the bat in 40 days' time. Michael Morales says in his book is called Exodus, Old and New. He says, quote, within the context of the newly established covenant relationship, Israel's idolatry is tantamount to a bride's committing harlotry on her wedding night. So within the context of the newly established covenant relationship, the marriage covenant, the marriage contract, Israel's idolatry with the golden calf is tantamount to a bride's committing harlotry on her wedding night. So this Israel's history is a history of idolatry at this point. It started in Egypt, it continued in the time of the golden calf, and it will continue even forward after that as they go throughout their wilderness experience and even when they get into the promised land initially. So these are some important things to think about when it comes to the Ten Commandments and the two stone tablets. Let's just take a minute here. We'll go through a little bit more here now in chapter 32, starting in verse 19, just to kind of get our feet wet in this and see what's happening now that Moses has come back down from Mount Sinai with the two stone tablets in his hand. It says in verse 19, and it came about as soon as Moses approached the camp that he saw the calf and the people dancing, and Moses' anger burned, and he threw the tablets from his hands and shattered them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. So this idea of Moses' anger burning, the idea of this in the original Hebrew is it's an intense anger. It says that Moses' anger burned. This is an intense anger. And furthermore, it's meant to kind of indicate intense initial anger that you have at the beginning of something. So, in other words, when you get angry about something, when something upsets you, typically what happens is you're most angry when it first occurs. You get most upset when it first happens. And then over time, whether it be minutes or hours or days or months or even years, over time your anger kind of subsides a little bit. It may never go away completely, but it kind of subsides a little bit over time. But so your that initial anger is the most intense that you feel when you're angry about something. So what Moses wants us to know here when he's writing about this is that he felt this an emotional, this intense anger, like the anger that you have at the very first when something happens, that it was the most anger he could possibly feel, and it happened, that kind of anger that happens at the beginning of something that upsets you is basically what he's talking about here. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because just a little bit earlier in chapter 32, we had Moses trying to persuade God not to be so angry because God was so upset. He said, we're just going to wipe all those people out down there, Moses, and we'll just start over, and I'll start over with you. And Moses had to say, now, God, now don't just, maybe we shouldn't do that. Let's not be hasty. Let's think about this. But now we see Moses angry. Moses is the one who has this intense initial anger. And I wonder if God was up there saying, to himself, I told you so, Moses. I told you so. This is bad. It's a reason. It's a good reason to get angry. And so here we're dealing not with God's anger and God's wrath. We're going to be dealing with Moses' anger and Moses' wrath. And the understanding whether it was God or Moses, it really is a righteous anger. They want to take out a righteous wrath on these people because what they're doing is so awful and terrible. And I think now Moses, when he comes and he sees what's really going on, he understands now. He understands why God was so upset and why God had threatened to just destroy the people. And I think, it was just such a shock. I think it was just such a shock to Moses. God had told him what was going on at the base of the mountain, that the people were doing this. But hearing it is one thing, seeing it is another thing altogether. And I think, here comes Moses down from the mountain. I said earlier, he just had this wonderful experience with God, and so that had filled him up with this wonderful feeling. And maybe another reason that he was so intensely angry is because he'd just come from this wonderful time with God, which made him even more sensitive to what they were doing. And I think when he came down the mountain, kind of if you read that passage there, that verse there, it says that he came down as soon as Moses approached the camp. He saw the calf. I think the calf was the first thing he saw. He's coming down and he's holding this marriage contract, this marriage covenant between God and his people that God has written with his own fingers after 40 days communing with God at the top of the mountain. And he comes down, and the first thing he sees, the first thing he lays eyes on is the golden calf. Yeah. Moses was carrying, and think about what Moses is doing here. Moses is carrying the true covenant of God. And the first thing he sees is the counterfeit that Satan has brought into the lives of God's people, the golden calf. Moses is holding the true covenant, the words of God, written by the finger of God, this marriage contract between God and man. And the first thing he sees is this satanic counterfeit of the golden calf being worshipped and sacrificed to by the Israelites. How awful that must have been for him. And so what does he do? What does Moses do? He breaks the 2 stone tablets. He breaks the 2 stone tablets. And what else does he do? Let's go on a little bit here. Verse 20. Then he took the calf which they had made and completely burned it with fire and ground it to powder and scattered it over the surface of the water and made the sons of Israel drink it. Drink it. Can you imagine? I mean, this ain't no chocolate milk here. This is water with golden powder in it. And not just any golden powder, but golden powder that was made into an idol, a golden calf. The people have already broken the marriage covenant with God. So Moses breaks the stone tablets that marriage covenant was written on. He comes down, he sees the golden calf. He realizes that the people have broken their agreement with God, and the covenant is broken because they have been disobedient. And so as they broke the covenant in that way with their lives, and what they were doing with their lives at that moment, Moses broke the representation of that covenant that God had given him to carry to them. Because the contract, the covenant, the marriage agreement is broken because of the people's disobedience. So one of the significances of breaking the tablets is that it symbolizes the breaking of the covenant, that the people had agreed to obey him and to follow his commandments, as we just read a little bit ago, and now they have already turned away from that. And so Matthew Henry says, other nations boasted that they were true to their false gods. Well, may Israel blush for being false to the true God. Other nations boasted that they were true to their false gods. Well, may Israel blush for being false to the true God. And this isn't the last time that could be said for those people. So this is the first consequence that the people had to suffer because of what they had done with the golden calf, but there's more to come. So let's look just a little bit farther here. It says, verse 21, then Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them? So Moses is holding Aaron to account here. He's holding Aaron to account because remember, Moses had left Aaron in charge of the people while he went up on the top of Mount Sinai. Remember that? Let's look back at that just real quickly. Exodus 20, chapter 24, and look at verse 14. Verse 14, it says, or verse 13 actually. So Moses got up along with Joshua his servant, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. Verse 14, but to the elders he said, you wait here for us until we return to you, and behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a legal matter, have him approach them. So he had left Aaron in charge of the people while he was gone. And so when he comes back and he sees what's happening, he holds Aaron to account. Aaron, what did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin against them? He says, what did these people do to you? He assumes that the people must have in some way done something to Aaron, to threaten him in some way to make Aaron do this. Certainly, Aaron didn't do it willingly. That in some way he must have been forced to do it against his will, because he certainly wouldn't have done this on his own. Moses can't believe that Aaron would have possibly done this. And I think he's kind of saying, Aaron, do you mean to tell me that you were more afraid of these people and what they might do to you if you did this than of what God might do to you if you did it, and to them if you did it? Remember in Matthew 10, what did Jesus say? Matthew 10:28, do not be afraid of those who will kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body. So Moses can't believe that Aaron would have done what he did without being forced to do it, because how could you possibly be more afraid of what these people would do than what God would do? So he goes on and he says here, verse 22, and Aaron said, do not let the anger of my Lord burn. So my Lord there he's talking about Moses, not the Lord God. He says, do not let the anger of my Lord Moses burn, you have this burning anger. You know the people yourself that they are prone to evil. You know these people. So Aaron is trying to calm Moses down here now. He's trying to calm Moses down. So Moses tried to calm God down, and now Aaron is trying to calm Moses down. And he says, Moses, you know these people. You know for yourself what they are like. You know them as well as I know them. And you know what they are like. And what does he say that they are like? He says that they are prone to evil. They are prone to evil. What a terrible thing to be known for in life, that you are prone to evil. Wouldn't that be terrible if they said about you, you know, so and so? Yeah, I know him. Boy, isn't he prone to evil? And yet, this is what these people were already known for in the eye of the Lord and Moses and Aaron. You know them, Aaron, as well as I do, and they're prone to evil. And if you look back at the history of the Israelites in the Old Testament up until this point, I mean, you can see it over. Start with the way they were behaving before the flood. That's why God sent the flood. Look at how they were acting in the time of Nimrod, for example. Look at how they were acting with Cain and Abel and the way that happened. So even with Adam and Eve and the fact that they were distracted to evil by Satan. So it goes all the way back, and so Aaron is saying, "Hey, this is the way these people were." And so then he goes on. He says, verse 23. This is still Aaron speaking. He goes, "For they said to me, 'Make a god for us who will go before us. For this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him.'" We heard that before, didn't we? He's just repeating to Moses what the people said to him. And verse 24, "So I said to them, 'Whoever has any gold, let them tear it off.' When they gave it to me, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf." What? I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. Does that sound like it's even possible? Moses, I just took the gold, I threw it in the fire. I'll pop this golden calf. Oh my goodness. If it weren't so terrible and awful, it'd be funny. Okay, we're going to pause there. We're going to come back next time, and we're going to pick up with the Aaron's explanation of the golden calf. We're going to see why that is obviously not what happened. But we're also going to talk about why some of the Jewish tradition kind of indicates that possibly that could have happened. We're going to see who all Aaron is blaming for what happened, how the golden calf came to be. Of course, blaming everyone but himself. And then we'll finish off next time the rest of chapter 32 and maybe touch a little bit on chapter 33. And we'll continue on then. But for now, may the Lord bless you, and don't be an Aaron, be a Moses in his best times. Okay, see y'all later. Bye.